When people talk about World War II survival, they usually focus on battles, weapons, or grand strategy. What rarely gets discussed is the quiet fight that happened behind closed doors, in farmhouses cut off from supply lines, apartments sealed by occupation, and rural homes buried under snow with no access to markets for months or even years. Entire families survived in total isolation, not because they had stockpiles of luxury food, but because they knew how to turn almost nothing into meals that could sustain life. These were not recipes meant to taste good. They were designed to stretch calories, preserve nutrients, and keep bodies functioning under relentless stress. Many of these meals have disappeared from modern memory because they were born from desperation, but the knowledge behind them is still incredibly relevant today. What you are about to hear is not nostalgia. It is a practical record of how ordinary people fed themselves when the world collapsed around them. How root mash meals became the backbone of isolated survival diets. One of the most common forgotten World War II meals was the root mash, built from potatoes, turnips, parsnips, and beets grown in small garden plots. Families boiled these roots together, skins included, then mashed them into a dense paste. The goal was not flavour, but efficiency. Boiling multiple roots at once conserved fuel, while keeping skins on preserved calories and minerals. Leftover mash was cooled, sliced and pan-fried the next day to create a second meal with minimal added effort. Today, this approach translates directly to modern off-grid cooking by emphasizing calorie density, fuel efficiency, and zero-waste preparation. How flourless bread substitutes kept families alive when grain disappeared. In many occupied regions, wheat flour vanished early in the war. Families adapted by creating bread substitutes from grated potatoes, ground acorns, or dried legumes crushed into powder. These mixtures were bound with water or leftover cooking liquid and cooked on flat pans or directly on stovetops. The result was dense, filling, and slow to digest, which helped regulate hunger during long days without meals. Modern application of this method lies in learning to produce edible starch-based foods without relying on commercial flour, an essential skill during supply disruptions. Why soup meals were engineered to extract every possible nutrient. World War II isolation meals often revolved around soup, but these were not casual broths. Bones, vegetable scraps, onion skins, and even cleaned eggshells were simmered for hours to extract minerals. Families reused the same soup base multiple times, adding new scraps as they became available. This continuous cooking system ensured maximum nutrient recovery with minimal ingredients. Today, this method aligns closely with modern survival nutrition principles by emphasizing mineral extraction, hydration, and gut-friendly cooking. So, let's talk about how fermented vegetable meals actually replaced refrigeration entirely. Without electricity or, any ice, fermentation really became essential for survival. Cabbage, carrots, and even wild greens were packed with salt into crocks and just left to ferment. These fermented meals, they provided vitamin C, which was just crucial for preventing deficiency diseases during those long, harsh winters. Families often ate small portions every day rather than, say, large servings, so fermented vegetables became more of a supplement than the main dish. And honestly, modern survivalists can learn a lot from this by mastering some basic fermentation techniques that preserve food without power and, over time, even improve its nutritional value. Now, why did milk-stretching porridges sustain children and elders? Well, milk was often quite scarce, but families managed to stretch it by mixing small amounts with water and grain substitutes, creating these thin porridges. These meals were gentle on digestion, and especially for children and elderly family members, incredibly important. The porridge was usually cooked slowly, so it would thicken naturally, making folks feel fuller, even though there weren't many calories in it. Today, this technique can be really valuable for maintaining nutrition during shortages, especially when you need to prioritize the most vulnerable members of your household. So, how were protein scraps transformed into sustaining meals? Well, whenever meat was available, absolutely nothing went to waste. Fat trimmings were rendered down into cooking grease, bones were boiled over, and even organ scraps were minced up and added to stews. Families understood, you see, that protein scarcity required a fair bit of creativity. Small amounts were carefully spread across several meals rather than eaten all at once. Modern preparedness, I think, can really benefit from this mindset, emphasizing protein conservation and portion control instead of focusing on short-term abundance. During long shortages, garden leaf stews, actually replaced meat entirely. Leaf stews made from beet greens, nettles, dandelion leaves and cabbage tops became quite common in isolated homes. These greens were cooked slowly with just a small amount of fat, which helped improve calorie absorption. The knowledge of which wild greens were safe to eat was, often passed down through generations, making this practice both cultural and practical. Even today, learning how to identify and prepare edible plants remains, honestly, one of the most powerful survival skills. Let's talk about why saved cooking water actually became a food source itself. You see, water used to boil vegetables was never just discarded. Instead, it was reused as a soup base, as the liquid for porridge, or even, at times, as a simple drinking broth. This water contained dissolved vitamins and calories that would otherwise be lost, which honestly made a significant difference. In modern crisis cooking, this principle remains critical, especially, when nutrition must be preserved under scarcity. Now, let's look at how layered leftover meals reduced hunger over time. Families often layered leftovers into new meals rather than simply reheating them as they were. Mashed vegetables became soup thickener, stale bread substitutes were soaked and fried, and fermented vegetables were added to stews for both flavour and nutrition. This sort of constant transformation kept meals psychologically tolerable and, nutritionally balanced. The lesson here is adaptability rather than rigid meal planning. So, why do these forgotten meals still matter today? These WWII isolation meals were not about comfort. They were about survival, efficiency and, above all, resilience. The people who relied on them understood food as fuel, as medicine and as morale combined. In a modern world that depends so heavily on fragile supply chains, this knowledge is no longer just historical trivia. It is, quite frankly, practical preparedness. If you found value in these forgotten lessons, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, share this video with someone who appreciates real history, and help keep this knowledge alive. These stories deserve to be remembered, not just for what they were, but for what they can still teach us today.